everyone, and welcome to Texas AFT's Supporting Public Schools Virtual Forum. My name is Clarissa Riojas. I'm an educator and vice president of the McAllen American Federation of Teachers. This evening, we're proud to host two Texas AFT endorsed candidates, candidate for State Board of Education District 2, Thomas Garcia, and candidate for the Texas House of Representatives District 37, Ruben Cortez. Throughout the evening, we'll be having a conversation about the issues affecting public schools each day. We'll discuss how each candidate plans to improve our community schools, support our school employees, and better the educational experiences of students throughout the state. At this time, I'd like to take an opportunity I'd like to welcome each of the candidates and ask them to introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with State Board of Education District 2 candidate, Mr. Thomas Garcia.
Thank you, Texas AFT, for hosting this virtual town hall. It is a true pleasure to be here. Thomas Garcia, I am from Far, Texas. I was born and raised in a single-parent household, and to me, education was always that great equalizer growing up. I became an educator right out of college, but my educator work actually started at age 19 when I was a college freshman. Far San Juan Alamo ISD gave me the platform to give back to my community through college access. On paper, I was never supposed to go to college, but educators, counselors believed in me, and Dr. Daniel King at PSGA believed in me so much at age 19 to give me the chance to host summer institutes on college essay writing, financial aid, scholarships, leadership development, and so much more for high school seniors wanting to go to college at PSGA. All that curriculum development over every summer as a college student became my first job after high school, teaching high school, and making sure that curriculum lasted beyond me. Gave that curriculum to PSGA ISD, and to this day, I teach college access lessons in multiple classrooms here in Hidalgo County through my nonprofit organization. My goal has always been to reach more students, to have more impact. And the reality is, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we have all been working in a broken system. The reason why I'm running for the State Board of Education is to start closing gaps after 8 years of filling them in. I hope we can start implementing more mental health resources, start fighting for moving away from the STAR test and implementing 21st century learning standards. We're talking about service learning, digital literacy, computer science, dual language, and so much more that we need for our state to get ahead in the 21st century. And of course, we need to stand for our school workers, school employees. That is why I'm proud to be here today with Texas AFT. And thank you again for hosting this town hall. I'm really excited to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Thomas. Mr. Cortez?
Yeah, I want to thank you guys for inviting me to join you this virtual town hall. I have a long history with the Texas Federation of Teachers. I'm proud to represent currently on the Board of Education as the seat that I currently hold. I've been on the board now for a decade. So I've spent a decade working, representing all of our schools in the state of Texas, in deep South Texas, and helping make decisions for the over 5.5 million students that we have in our Texas public schools. As a proud Texan, someone who was born in the Rio Grande Valley, a husband of 22 years, going on 23, as father of four children who are all in the public school system. I understand the work that we need to do so that we can make sure that next generation of leaders gets what it needs. This is why I've spent a lifetime giving back in our community, whether it was on the local school board, whether it was on the Education Service Center board, or now on the State Board of Education, in the position that I serve in now. This opportunity came around so that we can. There's a vacancy on the Texas House for District 37. And as this pandemic has evolved, I've seen a tremendous amount of failures at the state's part. They're so busy playing politics and ignoring us. And I think families deserve better. There's no doubt that families are our biggest assets in our communities. That's why I've worked across party lines and post-standardized testing. We work to expand services for students with disabilities. We passed the first Mexican American Studies course in this state's history with a unanimous vote. In a state like ours, that's a pretty difficult thing to get done. But these are things that I'm proud to have been able to work on. Proud of the things that we've been able to do, and a lot of these things that we've done them side by side with the support of the Federation of Teachers in Austin. All of you here in the Rio Grande, whether it's Brownsville, whether it's McAllen, PSJA, or Brenda's group at La Joya, or Marcia's group in Edinburgh, my friend Dr. Vera in Corpus Christi, everyone has played an integral role in helping with the work that we do. And so that's why I'm honored to be here with you guys in this virtual town hall as we kind of discuss some of the important topics of what's happening in this state and how we can all join together to strengthen the education system for our state.
Thank you, Ruben. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome our panelists. So this evening, you'll be hearing from AFT local presidents and members throughout South Texas. I'm going to invite each panelist to take a few moments to introduce themselves and name their roles within Texas AFT. And I'd like to start with Mr. Martin Alanis.
Hi, my name is Martin Alanis, and I'm the treasurer for La Joya AFT. I've been the treasurer since probably 2012, and thank you for having me.
Celia Saiz, you can go next.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Celia Saiz. I am a co-chair with BEST in Brownsville, and I'm glad to be here.
Lázaro Cárdenas.
Yes, hello, good evening. My name is Lázaro Cárdenas, and I'm a BEST leader in Brownsville BEST AFT. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Brenda. Oh, you're muted, Brenda.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brenda Lee Salinas. I'm the president of the La Joya American Federation of Teachers.
And Sylvia.
Hi, good evening. This is Sylvia Tanguma, and I'm the president for McAllen Federation of Teachers.
So before we jump into questions, I'd like to point out how important the SBOE election is. Many of our families and friends may not realize what a critical elected position this is for educators and students. The State Board of Education sets policies and standards for Texas public schools. They determine our curriculum standards, approve and adopt instructional materials like textbooks, establish graduation requirements, oversee the Texas Permanent School Fund, and more. The responsibilities of the SBOE are enormous and impact our schools just as much as the legislature. With that, I'd like to ask SBOE member Ruben Cortez, as you are leaving the SBOE, what will its continued challenges be, and how will you address those challenges in the legislature once you are elected?
There's no doubt there's a lot of challenges that the SBOE has. I mean, even right now with one of the panelists that we're dealing with that has made some inflammatory comments, and we're trying to figure out a way to get this individual removed as an expert panelist. But you know, when you're on a body that has 15 members and you've got 6 Democrats, 9 Republicans, I mean, what needs to happen is the work that you guys are doing. I think everybody that's showed up understands the importance of elections, understands that by working together, we are more powerful. This is why you see these types of legislation for voter suppression. They know that if we band together, we're stronger, and we can make the changes that are necessary. You know, all the things that you mentioned is what the Board of Education does. When I came in, our permanent school fund was in $33 billion range. Today, the permanent school fund sits north of $50 billion. And that's the fund that gets used to purchase all of the instructional materials. That's the fund that we use so that we can ensure that we have intergenerational equity so that my great grandchildren will have access to this fund for whatever resources that they need for our Texas schools. And one of the things that the legislature did recently was pass a bill that would have the SBOE take this fund that was directed to be run by the Board of Education under the Texas Constitution. They directed through legislation that we create a special purpose corporation, and that not only the SBOE manage it, but other people outside of the SBOE. And those things are very harmful because they're moving towards privatizing this fund that belongs to you, to me, and to every child, and to all of these children that have not yet come into existence, who we need to already be planning for generations from now. And one of my big fears is that they'll try to privatize this fund, and we don't want that. The other thing is making sure that we appoint the right folks to serve on curriculum review panels. You know, I've mentioned this before, but in the first 6 months that I came into this office, when I got elected in 2012, I took office in January of 2013. In the first 6 months, I appointed more teachers from the Rio Grande Valley to serve on curriculum review panels that have an input on what our future textbooks look like than had been appointed in the 30 years prior to my arrival on this board, right? And so having somebody from the Rio Grande Valley, giving them the opportunity to replace me on the SBOE is going to be able to continue in that tradition of making sure that South Texas, all of South Texas, has a voice in this process, in creating these standards and establishing our graduation requirements, and in working to ensure that we can support schools and students in every possible way. And there's so many things in the legislature that I'd love to work on. I think there's a lot of bills that have come out of the legislature that had good intentions, but some of the side effects of what they're doing, they're causing more work and more harm on teachers, and that's why you're seeing more and more educators quickly exiting this profession. On the legislature, I'll be able to work on, things like potentially canceling the STAR, at least until this pandemic ends and we have more kids in our schools. Talk about paying better wages to our teachers who have just, in my opinion, been under-respected by this system, right? There's so many things that we can work on together. And I think it's time that we put educators and our public schools first and stop using them as a political football every legislative session.
Thank you, Ruben, for that. So building off what Ruben Cortez just said, what kind of plan or ideas? I'm sorry, this question is for Thomas. So Mr. Thomas Garcia, building off what Ruben Cortez just said, what kind of plan or ideas do you have to combat the classroom censorship attack on educators, referring to a false narrative that is being spun around critical race theory? And how will you approach your work in updating the TEKS with what the legislature passed regarding social studies?
Well, Texas SB3 is regressive for many reasons. And one of the many reasons is how it chills speech in the classroom. One of the statutes in the bill says a teacher might not be compelled to discuss a controversial issue, but it doesn't clearly define what a controversial issue is. It's very vague for a reason. And so if a teacher does discuss these topics, they must somehow explore that topic objectively and in a way that it does not have any political bias on it. And that isn't clearly defined either. So we must work within that vagueness. It can work against us, but it can also work for us. So I propose working closely with pedagogy and curriculum development experts in order to develop TEKS and instructional materials that clearly delineate between controversial and necessary. Here on the ground, I've been hearing reports of social studies teachers being afraid to teach about the civil rights movement. We had Martin Luther King Jr. Day a couple weeks ago. They don't want to teach about the civil rights movement, MLK Jr., Rosa Parks. That's absurd. And so we do need instructional materials and TEKS that clearly defend our teachers so they can teach what they need to teach. One way to do that is to make sure that the teacher's role is that of a critical facilitator in these discussions rather than sage on the stage. And I think developing TEKS that encourage debate and discussion amongst the students will allow us to avoid teachers receiving complaints about something they said. And that's also just generally good pedagogy when you can do Socratic seminars and let the students lead the way in a critical framework that the teacher creates. And in the long term, I support expanding our ethnic studies courses and classifying them as social studies credits. Right now, they're electives. As social studies credits, more students would have the opportunity to take them, and doing so, it would also open the gate toward more curriculum development and overlap among the U.S. history courses.
Thank you very much. I completely agree. Especially, I like the fact that you pointed out bringing up Socratic seminars, because this is the students, going in the direction that they want to go, that it's taking them. So yes, thank you very much for that.
Okay, the next question is for Mr. Ruben Cortez. Inflation combined with historical underfunding of educator salaries has cost educators and school employees real economic gains over the last decade. If elected, what will you do to bring about real salary increases for educators and school employees?
So that's an excellent question. As some of you may know, I'm married to an educator, right? And my wife is a career educator. She's an elementary principal, been in education for 25 years, I believe, at this point. And, there's things that as a legislature we can do almost immediately. I mean, you've got, I don't know how many billions of dollars our governor is spending building a border wall. It's unnecessary. Those funds, if that is going to happen, should be federal funds, shouldn't be state funds. Those are your dollars. Those are our dollars, right? He's spending an enormous amount of money with the National Guard. He's diverting $800 million every biennium to do this work along the border that our Border Patrol officers are well capacitated to do. So those are immediate funds that we can work on, that we can draw back in an effort to put that money back into public education to bring about real change. There's no doubt that there's a lot of teacher burnout happening right now. And it's time that we pay educators what they are worth and not pit them on this program that the state has, where some of you may have it in your district and one teacher will get a $20,000 bump for doing something and others don't. There's a dicho, right? Todos hijos de Dios o todos hijos del diablo. You're all doing the work, and you all should be treated with dignity and respect for what you're doing. And as your next state representative, I will work with you so that we can address some of these very important things for all educators in the state of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Ruben Cortez. And you are right. It is time to pay educators what they are worth. So thank you for that. So the next question is posed to Thomas. Educators in the state feel a profound sense of disrespect. We do not feel valued by the powers that be, and we do not feel included. If you are elected, Mr. Garcia, Mr. Thomas Garcia, how will you ensure experienced, highly qualified educators and school employees are respected and included in debates decisions, and policies adopted by the School Board of Education?
It's a very necessary question, and there's many ways to approach this. On the ground, we need to show up. This is a big district, almost 2 million people, big school districts, small school districts, all along the Gulf Coast. But we need to show up. And in between these meetings up in Austin, we have to be able to see what's happening on the ground and collect data effectively, survey data from our educators. If there's a program that is working in our local schools, let's say the mental health EQ counselor program at McAllen ISD, can that program be studied, replicated, funded, and expanded statewide? We need to be able to talk more about the teacher experience day to day. How do we reduce administrative tasks if we don't know what they are? Can we streamline them to other employees and then advocate to the state legislator for more funding and more personnel? The other way I see this issue is, in my authority on the State Board of Education, I would be able to champion educators and school workers doing really important work on the ground that otherwise might be invisible because it's within the walls of the classroom or on the campus. One example, one missed opportunity, I should say, happened back in October when the TEA opened testimony on the charter school performance network framework. The State Board of Education, Texas education groups, and educators and school employees should have been more than just advocates in that process. And they shouldn't have had to break their back to try to make their voice heard on what this looked like. The elected SBOE should have had a hand in revising that framework from the beginning. And the school employees on the ground should have been much more involved, not just giving public testimony. They should have been on a lot more committees, not just for this specific issue, but year round. Educators need to be engaged by the state on these bureaucratic decisions. And they need to be given more accessible, relevant information on what these decisions like this framework means, for example, for their workplaces. One thing that the TAA has been doing recently is soliciting input on the social studies TEKS from parents. Well, it should be a no-brainer. We should be doing that with our educators. If we can do that with parents, we should be doing that with our educators and doing more than just putting them on committees and letting them go. They need to be having a seat at the table. On the State Board of Education, I would be very active on the ground, making sure those voices are heard, the data is collected, and it's implemented and lobbied effectively at the state legislature.
Thank you, Thomas. This
Thank
next
you.
question is for Ruben. What do you think about the debate over mask mandates for educators and students on public school campuses? And as a state legislator, how would you address COVID-19 safety in schools?
Well, I think Governor Abbott, for starters, lifted his executive order too soon. I think that he should have stuck with, I believe, Executive Order 38, which allowed the flexibility for school boards to make these decisions. That way, if you had a school board that didn't agree, an organization like yours could step in, who's already working with the local school boards, and assess what's going on the ground, so that every district is making decisions based on what's happening in their community. So that's the first thing, making sure that the local control stays within the local school district. It's clear that when we returned from this winter break, there has been a huge uptick in COVID-19 cases. You know, the number of pediatric cases is on the rise. There was a student from PSJA who I read about a few months ago who had been critically ill and was needing organ transplants as a result of getting COVID-19. You know, I'm a parent. A lot of you that are listening in are parents. If you're not, you're an aunt, you're an uncle, you're a grandma, you're a grandpa, right? Or you have friends that have kids and you feel for those kids. Maybe you have a goddaughter or godson. None of us want any harm to come to our kids. Absolutely not. We all know that we need to keep our schools open, but in order to do that, they need to be safe, and people need to be healthy so that we can keep our schools open. And so this pandemic, there's been talk on both sides. So you've got a lot of people who don't believe in taking the vaccine. Well, that's on you, right? But this COVID-19 pandemic isn't going to end unless we all work together. And even when it ends, it's still going to become like what we do now. We go and get an annual flu shot, right? Over time, that's what this pandemic is going to become an endemic, right? And as it shifts into that, there's certain things that are going to become our new normal. You know, in the state legislature, one of the things I'd love to do is to ensure that school districts have the proper resources. You know, you can call Superintendent Albert Peña at San Perlita ISD. Their school district stayed closed an extra week after the break because they didn't have not one single test, a COVID test, so that they can offer any employee or any student who wanted a test upon return from winter break. So they closed for a week while they tried to get that sorted out. I want to say it was like on the Friday night before that Monday, the 10th of January, when they reopened. He sent me a text on Friday evening. He's like, Mr. Cortez, I don't think we're going to open. And I said, what's going on, Albert? You know, I've known Albert for a long time. And he's like, I hope you don't mind me bothering you on a Friday night. I said, no, of course not. What's happening? He's like, man, I don't have any tests. So I found a pharmacy group in the Upper Valley who went down there on that Monday morning, offered a COVID testing clinic so that they can open up. And guess what? About 25% of the people that came in and tested positive. But had he opened without test, those 25% of those people would have gone into the schools, sat with their colleagues, if they were employees, I don't know if they're employees or students, or sat in their classrooms with the other students. And then you would have had a major super spreader event in a district like San Perlita. And that, I believe, is a failure on the part of the state to not ensure that they even have a resource like that made available to them. You talk to Dr. Chapa, head of nursing at the Rio Hondo School District. They've ordered tests. They were on back order since September. How does this happen, right? And then the tests that they did have in stock expired in November. As an employee of a school district, would you want to be COVID tested with an expired test? No. Would you want your child, if they're in that school district, tested with an expired test? No. These things shouldn't be happening, but they are, and they need to be addressed. I don't think this is a Democrat or Republican issue. I think everyone in the Texas legislature would agree that we want to keep our businesses open. We want to keep our schools open. We want to keep our communities open. Shutting down Texas is not good for our economy. But if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that it's safe so that they can be healthy, so that we can remain open. And so, again, these aren't things that we're going to politicize. It's just stating facts with figures that we already know exist. And these are the types of things that I think need to be addressed as it relates to COVID-19. And if I can just expand that slightly, you know, TEA worked on Project Connectivity, and we were able to put over 5 million devices into the hands of students. And as amazing as that figure is, as amazing of a feat as that was for the state of Texas, for us to have done that, it still didn't go far enough, because you had school districts all over the state, including La Joya and Brownsville, who are parking buses in different areas. And you're having kids in a parking lot in the back seat of mom or dad's car using that device that the school district gave them, connecting to a hotspot or Wi-Fi on a school bus, because that's what we could do, you know. And so we definitely need to work on broadband issues, especially in our rural areas. And so there's a lot of opportunities for us to strengthen public education when it comes to COVID-19, and these are just a few of the things that I think I'd be working on as your next state representative.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This next question is for Mr. Thomas Garcia. Charter schools in Texas account for $3.6 billion in public education funding, but aren't accountable to locally elected school boards or the voters. This lack of accountability has led to serious abuses with charter school operators paying for skybox tickets, private planes, and advertising with taxpayer dollars. What will you do to oversee that charter school system in Texas and to protect the taxpayers from these abuses?
Charter schools in Texas need much more oversight on many matters, from academic to financial performance, and how that information is distributed to the public, especially parents and families, also needs a lot of work. And I think this is also where the advocacy position of the State Board of Education can come in. My personal background from K through sixth grade, I was placed in an alternative parochial school, private school, not charter. But I faced very similar issues with not having the proper metrics and information on what a good school is provided to my family. And it turns out the school was not accredited. There are many issues of transparency in schools. We need to make sure that we have oversight, not from the unelected education commissioner, but on the elected State Board of Education. You can hold us accountable to how hardline are we during this TEA interviews. Are we getting the right information on what a good school is, on what financial solvency is? We need to be able to get that information and make the right decisions when we get that information on voting yes or no to approve or expand these schools. But also, how do we get that out to the families so they can make the right choice for where they put their children? I want to be a very active advocate in collecting that data and making sure we can send that out to our families, no matter where they're at, big or small school district, rural, urban. I also support reducing the commissioner's authority to grant the charter school expansions, the amendments. That authority is way too broad, and it should be limited or moved to the State Board of Education, our oversight authority. Outside of the State Board of Education, I want to be a loud advocate to the state legislator. There's current legislation by Mr. Terry Canales that has done, that would do a very tremendous job of spotlighting some of the transparency issues with charter schools and vendors. I do support legislation that would add an elected board to charter schools so we can actually keep them accountable at the local level. And I would hope to work together with Mr. Ruben Cortez at the state legislature to shine a spotlight on very specific issues like that and make sure we can work in coordination to hold these schools accountable.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So the next question is for Ruben Cortez. Mr. Cortez, school districts are putting more and more work onto educators and asking for more each day. How can we make sure that an educator's workday and work-life balance is respected while at the same time making sure we are fairly compensated for our work?
You know, that's an excellent question. And I think I mentioned before, I'm married to an educator, so I hear it daily. I have a sister who's a special education teacher, and I have, over the last 10 years on the Board of Education, made a lot of amazing friends, including all of you who are on the panel tonight. And I know we've had this conversation over the last 10 years, some of us, many times. And clearly the legislature continues to offer up these unfunded mandates without increasing the value of what that work means in terms of paying our educators what they're worth. And I think that needs to stop. I think that we need to demand more for what you guys are worth, for what you guys are doing. I think it was a couple of sessions ago, pre-pandemic, when teachers showed up by the thousands to the state capitol. And they heard you all loud and clear. Right now, we're probably going to enter a legislative session on January 11th when we begin next year. And if I'm fortunate enough to get in there, I mean, that'd be great, because you're going to have an ally in this office. But we need to be ready to ensure that we elect the right people statewide in these offices, because if we're in the pandemic year like we are right now, next year, Look what happened in the legislative session and the special sessions. Advocacy groups that normally come and advocate, and they send busloads of people down there, those numbers were diminished. The numbers of people that were showing up were much smaller in force because the legislature wasn't allowing people into the Capitol to come and advocate for the things that mattered to them. So those of us that are out there fighting for some of these issues, whether it was me supporting some of these legislation as your current SBOE member during those times, or whether it's me as your state representative after January 11th, if they shut that Capitol down, who we have in these seats matters, because you want somebody who's going to be ready to lead on day one and be able to address these things. I can tell you that not a single person in the race that's running with me right now is going to be more equipped on matters of public education than I am on day one. I think we very quickly work with every teacher union group in the state of Texas to identify the best fixes, immediately sponsor legislation that would help address some of these things, that would help mitigate some of the things that are going on right now. You guys are having to do 30 hours of remediation with students, but what if the student only needs 10 hours? You're still required to do 30, right? On top of all the other work that you guys have to do, and yet they don't throw more money in there to help you guys. I spoke with the superintendent from Sherryland a couple weeks ago or a week and a half ago, and she's like, I've told my team, put me anywhere that you need me. Just don't put me driving a bus. And so you've got some central office staff, not in all districts, but in some of them, where everybody's pitching in to help, because there are so many teachers that are out as a result of this pandemic. And, you guys are the true heroes of what is happening in this pandemic, because the expectation is that we need to get our kids and move them forward. And you guys are out there in the front lines every day. And you've got a system that doesn't value you for what you're worth. And so we need to make sure that these things get addressed. We need to make sure that we tell the stories of educators all across this state and the hard work that they're doing, so that they can understand that this is not a Democrat issue or Republican issue. This is how do we make education better? How do we strengthen it? My wife has a saying, as a principal, you have a happy teacher, you're going to have happy students. And if you have happy students, guess what? You have a happy community. And so my role as your state representative is to figure out, how do we have happy teachers? And for me, that's simple. Do things like canceling the STAR right now, and pay them better wages, pay them what they deserve. So, and working together, we can do that. Working across party lines with pro-public education Republicans, we can do that. These are things that we can do, but we're stronger together.
Thank you.
The next question is for Mr. Thomas Garcia. What makes you uniquely qualified to stand up for the voice of educators on the State Board of Education?
I'm currently the only active educator in the race. My position is unique because I am a former high school teacher, but what I do now is take my college access curriculum and teach that at multiple high schools here in Hidalgo County. I teach entire courses. I co-teach with fellow educators, whether it's English, social studies, college readiness courses. I co-counsel with the Go Center staff, helping students complete college and financial aid applications. It's essentially filling in the gaps where we must, depending on the campus and the school district. And that has been the story of my professional career. The whole reason I went into education was I looked behind me and I saw my high school senior friends going through the same issues I went through when I was a high school senior. I was 19 years old and I realized there's issues with the system, and I'm not going to wait until I get older. I want to make a difference now. I'm only 28 years old. And in my position right now throughout the pandemic, I'm the only one who has been teaching throughout the pandemic. And I've seen firsthand the mental health issues that our students and educators alike are going through. We need resources. We need more information out there about what's going on in our classrooms so we can solve problems rather than create more divisive narratives. We need an advocate on the State Board of Education who understands where educators are coming from. There was an NPR article yesterday that stated that over 50% of teachers are thinking of leaving the profession. How can we prevent that? We need to be talking about the real issues happening in the classroom, the administrative overload, the underappreciation because of overload of administrative tasks, teaching to the test, especially in the midst of an unordinary couple of years. Can you imagine sitting in the classroom, plexiglass, masks on, and then saying, turn to section 8.1 so we can learn how to pass the STAR test? It's absurd. We need to change how education is done in this state. And I hope to be one of 15 members who is leading the way to the 21st century when we say we're not just moving away from the STAR test, but we can move toward 21st century curriculum standards. We need more computer science in our schools, not just high schools, but in middle schools. And we need a statewide plan that makes it more equitable. So some high schools aren't just graduating students who know how to print Hello World. They can catch up to those high schools who are getting the students out in Google and Microsoft first year in college. Digital literacy is crucial in order for students to discern between fake and real information on the internet in real life settings, on social media, and Google algorithms. Dual language, service learning, so much more, that we need someone who is young, new, and currently in the classroom who can point the way and say, this is the way we need to go in order to move forward together. And that's why I think I'm in the most unique position and the most qualified to be on the State Board of Education in this race.
Thank you very much for your answers, Mr. Garcia. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And at this time, I'd like to ask our panelists if we have any additional follow-up questions.
Yes, Clarissa, may I?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this question is for Mr. Cortez, Ruben. As a member of the State Board of Education, what is it that you can tell Mr. Thomas Garcia about? What does he need to do in order for him to be elected so that our viewers, our educators, and the people in the state of Texas know that this is a very, very important position and that he will be a strong voice, for our public education?
So I can tell you that when I ran for that office, for me, it was real simple. I never wanted to go into Austin, go into that Texas Education Agency, sit in that boardroom, and Brenda, assume that I know what you needed in La Joya. I never, ever did that. I never wanted to assume, Lázaro, that I knew what Brownsville needed. I didn't want to assume, Sylvia, that I knew what McAllen needed. Instead, I went out and asked, right? This idea of us as individual board members collectively assuming that we think we know what is best for our schools. I believe for anyone in public office, in any position, anywhere, and I will take this with me into the state legislature if I'm fortunate enough to hold that position at the end of November, is that you never want to make a decision from the boardroom to the classroom. For me, that was the number one mantra that I ran with from the very beginning. You want to make decisions from the classroom to the boardroom. Those teachers that are in the field, that are practicing, that are working. I had a meeting last week before I went on some of these key topics. I spoke with several educators that I'm dealing with these topics at this meeting. How can you help me so that I know that the decisions that I make are in the best interest of what you need? And so before I arrived, I already knew what I was going to do on most of the topics. If a red flag came up, well, then we have to work on the fly there, right? Or you have your phone set up on a phone a friend, right? And you've got your emergency hotline. Not a single superintendent in this area that I don't have on speed dial. If I need to get a hold of them, I will. Whether it's Gisela Sainz, Dr. Vidauti, Javi Salinas, Brownsville, Port Isabel, Roland Hernandez in Corpus, whether it's in Black Cat Country in Bay City, you want to have these people available to you. They become your best resource. And if you always think you're not there for you, you're there for them, regardless of the outcome of the fight that may occur, and the fight will occur every time, and you're going to have to learn to have very thick skin through this process. I'm not there to win a popularity contest with the 14 other people I serve with. I have a job to do, and I have to deliver results for the 1.7 million people that I represent. Under the district that you're running for, it's now 1.9 million people. And so the results that you have to deliver, if you're elected, are for them. But I never want to go up there thinking I know what they need. These decisions need to come from the classroom to the boardroom. And I'm going to take that with me to the legislature. I'm not going to make decisions from the Capitol into our cities, into our schools, into our counties, into our police departments, into our fire departments. I'm going to go to the ground. I'm going to go and talk to them. I'll be able to go back to every AFT group and say, okay, I'm here. Now what? What do we need to address? I'm reminded of the time that I got elected on the local school board in Brownsville for the first time. AFT didn't have an operation in Brownsville in those days. But back then, the largest group was a TSTA group. And I went and sat with them. And I asked, if you can fix anything in this school district, what would it be? And they're like, sir, nobody's going to listen. I said, they just picked committees. Everybody wanted to be on insurance. Everybody wanted to be on facilities. I didn't want to be on insurance or facilities. I wanted to be on dropout recovery. How do we recover our kids? I wanted to be on technology because I knew technology was going to be the wave of the future. But more importantly, I wanted to be on policy because through policy, we run the district. And so the president's looking at me and telling me, you're the policy chair? I said, I sure am. If you can fix policy in this school district, what would it be? Give me your top 10. I may not agree with you on all of them, but let's try to get there. We changed 7 local policies to make working in conditions for employees of that district overnight. And none of the board was put up a red flag because they were interested in facilities. Who's the architect? Who's the builder? Who's selling us our insurance? I didn't give a crap about that. I'm here to help people. I have kids in the system. I want a better educational system. Those things didn't interest me. They still don't interest me, right? And so that's my advice to you is have a ground operation everywhere. Make friends with everyone. Reach out to everyone, even if it's a cold call, and you introduce yourself. Don't ever go up to Austin thinking with all of the experiences that you have and all the educational background that you have, don't ever assume that you know what is best for our classrooms. Always ask a committee of individuals because they may think a little differently than you, and they may shape the way you think about your approach when you show up to that meeting in Austin. I've lived by that for the last decade. Just had a meeting last week. The week before that, I was talking to educators about some of the stuff that I was dealing with. I have a few more meetings this year before my year ends up, and I'm going to do the same thing for the next few meetings because I don't want to make decisions on public education from the boardroom to the classroom. If everybody thought like that, Texas would be ranked number 1 because we listen to the people who are doing the hard work, who are on the front lines every day doing this work. And so that's the advice that I would give you. If you get elected into this office, then that's how you have to do this. That's how I will do it. If I'm blessed to get elected as the next state representative for District 37, I'm going to take that same philosophy, but not just for our schools, but for our communities.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you, Ruben. And I'd like to ask Thomas to deliver his closing statements.
Thank you, Texas AFT, for hosting this virtual town hall. It is an honor to be endorsed by Texas AFT and Texas AFL-CIO. It matters a lot to me. I come from a labor background. My mother worked hard as a retail worker in order to get me a better education. She worked hard so I didn't have to work as hard. As long as I focused in school and did well, I can go far. She always told me, though, make sure you come back and give back to FAR, PH, FAR, the city, and make sure that the students that you help actually are here, and notice that you can uplift your community, not just one person at a time, but collectively through the power of education. That has always been what I've been trying to do here on the ground. If I get unsatisfied helping just one, it jumps to 10, it jumps to 100 students, and now about 500 students serviced every year. I want to make a bigger leap and a bigger difference at the State Board of Education. I keep in mind a story that happened around 1 year ago this time during the pandemic. I was Zooming with a former student of mine who was homeless, had COVID, and was just bawling their eyes out, talking about how things were unfair and that they were happy that someone was there to listen to them. I was able to support them with technology, with COVID resources, and with money. It made me feel good to help one person. But that one student is just one of 5.4 million students in our state who are falling through the cracks. That moment made me feel powerless and powerful at the same time, that I could do something, but at the same time recognized how broken the system is. That is why I'm running for this position. I would feel like I would be doing my students a disservice if I didn't try. And so if you all would give me the chance to do greater work and more impactful and more meaningful work on the State Board of Education, I will not let you down. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you to our candidates. Texas AFT is proud to support your campaigns, and we look forward to working together to fight for our schools, students, and staff. And a big thank you to our panelists who are doing this hard work every day inside and outside of the classroom. We appreciate you being here tonight. To those at home, we'd like to thank everyone for attending Texas AFT Supporting Public Schools Virtual Forum. And if you are interested in helping our endorsed candidate get elected, we encourage you to check the chat for volunteer phone banking opportunities. To support our work and become a member, visit texasaft.org/membership. This concludes our program for the evening. Thank you and good night.